The shelter was silent that morning, except for one sound. A low, trembling growl came from the last cage on the left. Inside, a scarred German shepherd pressed against the corner, his eyes dark, his fur matted with mud and fear. Volunteers avoided him, whispering, "That's the one who bit a handler. The dangerous one." But then the door opened. A man in a worn jacket stepped in, calm, quiet, unafraid. As his eyes met the dog's, something shifted. The growl faded. The dog's paw twitched, then slowly lifted. The man knelt, whispering, "It's okay, buddy. I'm not here to hurt you." And for the first time in years, the hated dog reached out in trust. The shelter was old, its paint peeling, its halls echoing with endless cries. Rows of cages lined both sides, each holding a story of abandonment. But none as tragic as the German Shepherd in cage 12. His name was Shadow. Once a proud K9 unit dog, Shadow had been betrayed by the very people he trusted. When his handler didn't return from a mission, the department labeled him unstable and sent him away. Visitors avoided his cage. Whenever someone walked past, Shadow would bark, not out of anger, but confusion. Yet to the world, he was the dangerous one. Staff whispered rumors. He bit an officer. He can't be trusted. So they stopped trying. Days turned to months, and no one reached out again. Shadow learned silence. He stopped barking. He stopped hoping. Only the faint jingling of keys at feeding time reminded him that he was still alive. But that morning, when Daniel stepped through the shelter's door, something changed. He didn't flinch at the scars or the growl. He saw something else, pain, not malice. And as he stood before the forgotten cage, the staff exchanged glances. "He won't last another week," one muttered. Daniel's eyes softened. Then maybe it's time someone finally believed in him. Daniel wasn't supposed to be there that day. He'd stopped at the shelter only because the rain had forced him off the road. A retired Marine, he carried a quiet heaviness in his eyes, the kind only seen in those who've lost more than they can explain. As he walked past the cages, every bark echoed memories of commands, loyalty, and loss. But then, he saw him, Shadow. The dog stood still, chest heaving, eyes sharp yet hollow. For a long moment, they stared at each other, two souls scarred by war, separated by steel. A volunteer hurried over. "Sir, please step back. He's unpredictable," she warned. But Daniel didn't move. Slowly, he knelt, lowering himself to the dog's level. Shadow growled softly, uncertain. Daniel didn't flinch. He whispered, "Easy, soldier. I've been there too." The room went still. For the first time, Shadow's tail gave a hesitant twitch. His paw lifted, trembling, and pressed against the cage bars. The air shifted, fear melting into fragile understanding. The volunteer's eyes widened. "He's never done that before." Daniel smiled faintly, his voice steady but filled with something deeper, recognition. He just needed someone to look at him differently. And that was the moment everything began to change. The drive home was silent except for the faint hum of the tires and the soft breathing from the back seat. Shadow sat still, eyes wide, unsure where he was being taken this time. Daniel occasionally glanced at him in the rearview mirror. He saw not a monster, but a wounded soldier. When they arrived, Daniel left the door open. He didn't drag Shadow inside. He simply waited. Minutes passed. Snowflakes fell softly, landing on Shadow's fur. Then, cautiously, the dog stepped out, one paw at a time. Inside, the warmth of the cabin met him. A fire crackled, and for a moment, Shadow froze, overwhelmed by the scent of safety. But when Daniel set down a bowl of food and took a step back, Shadow hesitated. His ribs showed through his coat, yet trust held him still. Daniel sat on the floor, his voice calm. "No cages here, buddy. Just peace." Hours later, as the fire dimmed, Daniel drifted off on the couch. That's when it happened. A soft shuffle of paws, then a weight pressed gently against his leg. Shadow curled beside him, head resting near his boots. Daniel opened his eyes, smiling faintly. "Welcome home, soldier." That night, for the first time in years, both man and dog slept without nightmares. It had been 3 months since Daniel brought Shadow home. The once feared dog had changed, his eyes softer now, his tail wagging at the sound of Daniel's voice. But that peaceful life was shattered one cold evening. Daniel was chopping wood behind the cabin when the smell of smoke hit him. He turned. A neighbor's house was engulfed in flames. Without thinking, Daniel ran toward it. Call 911. He shouted to another bystander before charging inside. The heat was unbearable, the smoke thick, but he could hear faint cries coming from upstairs that he reached the staircase. Coughing hard, then everything went black. Moments later, Shadow, who had been waiting by the gate, began barking madly. When Daniel didn't return, he lunged forward, snapping his leash loose. Neighbors screamed for him to stop, but Shadow ignored them. He sprinted straight into the fire. Inside, amid falling debris and choking smoke, the dog found Daniel collapsed on the floor. Shadow bit into his jacket and began dragging, inch by inch, pulling the unconscious man toward the door. Flames licked the walls, heat searing his fur. But he didn't stop when firefighters arrived. They froze. A charred figure of a German shepherd stood over Daniel, chest heaving, refusing to move until help arrived. That night, the news would call him the dog everyone feared who became a hero. But for Daniel, the headline didn't matter. All that mattered was that his best friend had saved his life. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady rhythm of machines and the soft sound of breathing. Daniel lay in bed, his arm wrapped in bandages, his lungs still weak from the smoke. At his feet, curled up like a guardian angel, slept Shadow. His fur was singed, his paws wrapped, but his chest rose and fell steadily. When Daniel stirred, Shadow's ears perked up. The moment their eyes met, the dog's tail thumped against the floor. Daniel smiled weakly. "You saved me again, didn't you, soldier?" he whispered. Shadow lifted his head, licking Daniel's hand gently, as if to say, "You saved me first." Word spread quickly. The most hated dog became the town's miracle. News crews arrived, reporters asking for interviews, people leaving flowers outside the hospital. But Daniel only cared about one thing: getting Shadow home. Weeks later, as they stepped out into the sunlight together, the shelter staff waited outside with tears in their eyes. "He's not the same dog anymore," one whispered. Daniel smiled. "None of us are." Months passed, and together they began visiting local shelters. Daniel sharing their story, Shadow sitting proudly by his side. People who once looked at dogs with fear now saw hope. Daniel would always end with the same words: "Don't judge a soul by its scars. Sometimes the ones the world fears most are the ones sent to save it." And every time he said it, Shadow's tail would wag, proud, loyal, and free.